Hello, profilers!
It's time for our weekly rendezvous.
The podcast that shares with you true cases of French crimes.
So, what's today's story about?
Today's case is another love story gone wrong. A couple's happy marriage comes under scrutiny when the husband comes home to find his wife has been attacked and she's barely breathing. Who could have done this to her? Find out on today's episode, Infernal Triangle.
Enjoy the story!
On July 15th, 2010, at 10:10 p.m., in Saint-Martin-d'Arbois, a panicked man called into the fire department. His voice trembling, he asked for help and explained that he had been robbed and that his wife was lying on the floor and she had great difficulty breathing. He then explained that there was blood everywhere and broke down in tears, asking them to come as quickly as possible.
The man explained that when he came home from work, he discovered his wife in a pool of blood, right in the middle of the kitchen. The fire department, followed by the gendarmerie, immediately rushed to the house.
When they arrived, they saw the man holding his wife in his arms, a panicked man who was biting his fingernails despite his blood-covered hands. He was kneeling beside his wife, shouting, "What have they done to you? Tell me, what have they done to you?" The firefighters immediately jump into action to save the victim. The woman was breathing, but her pulse was very weak. The gendarmes tried talking to the husband so that he can calm down and get his mind off the situation at hand. They moved him away from the scene, even though he was in a state of shock. The gendarmes noticed that the amount of blood on the floor and walls was very startling. Puddles of blood splattered everywhere. It was a true horror scene, one gendarme declared. They also saw traces of bloody hands, as if someone had tried to get up and escape. The firefighters quickly rushed the victim to the hospital, but unfortunately, she suffered cardiac arrest shortly after arriving at the emergency room. Laurence Dromard, aged 43, died at 1:20 a.m. The gendarmes told Sylvain that his wife had died, and he burst into tears. But a few moments later, he pulled himself together and explained that he was now going to find the robber who killed his wife. He explained to the investigators that money had been stolen, 1,200 euros, which he claimed was in his office, and some jewelry, but of little value in his opinion. The office was ransacked, as was the bedroom, where several drawers were on the floor. But at the time, it wasn't this that caught the gendarmes' attention, but rather the footprints, which corresponded to a size 9 shoe, which were not those of Sylvain Dromard, who wore much larger shoes. What's even more disturbing is that it's a single set of footprints. There's no second foot. According to the forensic pathologist, the victim had been attacked in an extremely violent manner, with the base of the skull fractured, along with fractures to the eye sockets, the nose, and the entire jaw. This is known as a fracas crânio-facial. The whole area above the scalp was completely ripped open. At least 9 blows were delivered to the victim, most of which targeted the face. The blows were repeated and extremely violent. The killer had lost his temper.
On July 19th, 2010, a judicial investigation was opened against the unknown person for voluntary manslaughter, and 3 days later, the autopsy report would arrive on the examining magistrate's desk.
According to the forensic pathologist, the victim had been attacked in an extremely violent manner, with the base of the skull fractured, along with fractures to the eye sockets, the nose, and the entire jaw. This is known as a fracas crânio-facial. The whole area above the scalp was completely ripped open. At least 9 blows were delivered to the victim, most of which targeted the face. The blows were repeated and extremely violent. The killer had lost his temper. The investigators explain that, generally speaking, when a burglar stumbles upon someone in the house, there may be 1 or 2 blows to the person, so that he or she can manage to escape. But it's quite rare for a burglar to lash out so violently to an unknown victim. The gendarmes have their first doubts about the burglar. The investigators asked the coroner what time Laurence Dromard received the first blow. Was her attacker a man or a woman? Was he alone? Unfortunately, the coroner was unable to answer these questions. However, he was able to define the murder weapon, stating it was a blunt object, i.e., one that can injure on impact without cutting or piercing, but still producing contusions. On the scalp, the coroner found parallel wounds, like an object that can tear. In his opinion, the weapon that could most closely resemble this object would be a metal garden tool, like a cultivator for tilling the soil. But nothing was 100% certain. The investigators would be looking for anything resembling this tool in the Dromard's home, in the surrounding vineyards, and in neighbors' garages, since they think the thief might have gotten rid of it when he fled. But for the moment, the murder weapon had yet to be found. In continuing the investigation, a second thing came to the gendarmes' attention: the burglary itself. This was no ordinary burglary, as the drawers were not turned over like a normal burglary. Objects were spread throughout the room. It was as if every room had been ransacked, and this is not the modus operandi of a conventional burglary. The police then asked Sylvain Dromard where the envelope containing the money had been hidden. The answer was surprising. The envelope was hidden in a binder on a shelf, but this shelf had not been searched by the burglar. The police put forward 2 hypotheses. The first was that the burglar had been very, very lucky. And the second, and more plausible for them, was that the burglar knew exactly where the envelope was hidden. The investigators questioned the neighbors, but no one saw or heard anything. To get to the house, you had to take a small gravel path with houses all around. What's more, the investigators thought this burglary was rather strange, since the youngest of their 2 daughters had gone to stay with her grandparents, leaving Mrs. Dromard, therefore, home alone, which was extremely rare during the year. So, it was someone who knew the family's habits and who knew the victim. With that, the list of suspects is narrowed down even further. And with all these elements put together, it starts to become really suspicious for the gendarmes. They had a theory that didn't necessarily line up with the burglary story, but unfortunately, they had no evidence for the courts. One of the gendarmes then calls in DSC, the French Department of Behavioral Sciences, and its profilers, or more precisely, behavioral analysts. They will construct a criminal profile at the crime scene, a psychological portrait of the culprit based on his modus operandi. Where did he go? Why did he go there? Why did he use this weapon? Did he bring it with him? They'll retrace the robbery, trying to get inside the criminal's head, and the DSC will confirm the gendarme's suspicions. Laurence Dromard didn't surprise the burglar going through the drawers. She was the one surprised. The target wasn't the money. The target was Laurence Dromard, and she knew her killer. The very serious wounds on her face are a form of depersonalization that characterizes many criminal cases where there's certainly a link of acquaintance between the victim and the murderer.
Laurence Dromard was a hairdresser in Saint-Martin-d'Ablois. Everyone knew her. The gendarmes will now try and figure out what exactly happened here, and, in their opinion, her assassin is closer than we think.
Her husband and her 2 daughters were the most important thing to Laurence Dromard. The eldest is 19 and the youngest 14. Sylvain was almost 52 and they had been married for nearly 20 years. Sylvain has a carpentry business and works a lot. He is also said to be strong-willed, but well-liked, helpful, and he earns a good living. Thanks to his successful business, he bought acres of vineyards and several houses. As for Laurence, she ran a hairdressing salon just opposite her home and was very well known in this small town. She was always smiling, caring, listening to people talk. She was also very well liked in the community. The day before the tragedy, she was seen in her husband's arms, looking very happy and radiant. It was July 14th, synonymous with France's national holiday. That evening, the couple went to see the fireworks, then attended the town festival where they danced and had a few drinks. They were a happy, ordinary couple, but they hadn't always been this happy, as just a few months earlier, the couple had gone through a rough patch. It's no surprise to anyone that Sylvain Dromard is a ladies' man, multiplying his female conquests without regret. He is described as a seducer and a pleasure seeker. Through his job, he gives estimates and works with several women, and he doesn't hesitate to offer sex during consultations. And he took full responsibility for his infidelities, even in front of his wife.
Laurence, for her part, wanted to keep her husband and children at all costs. She didn't want conflict and preferred to turn a blind eye to her husband's infidelities. On July 15th, like every Thursday, Laurence was working in her retirement home. Her hairdressing salon was closed and the suitcases were packed.
The family had planned to go on vacation, to forget their worries and relax, heading for the sun and the beach. Everyone was excited to leave, and the whole family was thrilled. Sylvain's testimony gives the same version as the witnesses, but Sylvain Dromard leaves the gendarmes rather perplexed, as during questioning, his BAC, or blood alcohol content, was over the legal limit. He had been drinking. He was then examined by a doctor who noticed marks on his right arm and the right side of his groin. The gendarmes explained to Sylvain that they were going to have to photograph his injuries. And when he took off his clothes, the gendarmes were shocked by Sylvain's evil, menacing look. The investigators start to wonder about this man's attitude. They asked him what he was doing on July 15th. Most victims, when confronted with this question, get very upset because they are psychologically damaged. They are crushed and they don't remember their whole day.
However, Sylvain Dromard repeated his schedule with a precision that shocked the investigators, who found it very unusual. But what does Sylvain Dromard say about his schedule at the end of the day, the time that interests the gendarmes the most?
He explained that he closed his warehouse at 6 p.m. in Saint-Martin-d'Ablois, that he went home quickly and then passed by a customer's house to make an estimate in a nearby town, and that he returned home at 8:30 p.m. His wife was there, watering the garden. He had another estimate to do in a nearby town, and he asked his wife to come with him. But she declined, explaining that the suitcases weren't quite ready for the next day, and that she'd rather stay home and finish everything so that it was ready for their vacation. So he left alone for Épernay, the nearby town, and when he returned home at 9:50 p.m., he found his wife lying on the floor in a pool of blood. At 10:10 p.m., he called the fire department, 20 minutes after discovering his wife. The investigators checked everything out, and it all lines up. Or at least, almost everything, since one small detail doesn't exactly support Sylvain Dromard's statement. Mrs. Dromard was in fact gardening, but according to a neighbor, it was 7 p.m. She's sure of it because every day this neighbor arrives home from work at 7 p.m. She says hello to Mrs. Dromard, then goes for a walk in the neighborhood and returns home around 7:45 p.m. And at that time, Mrs. Dromard was no longer in the garden. Another thing that intrigues the gendarmes, a witness confirms to police that he had seen Sylvain Dromard at 9:10 p.m. in the street of Saint-Martin-d'Ablois, behind the wheel of a car, wearing a white t-shirt with small black stripes on his sleeves. However, the gendarmes recover video footage from a bank surveillance camera, which the man had visited that very morning, July 15th, wearing a black t-shirt. The investigators then asked him if he had changed clothes during the day, to which he replied, no. During the first interrogation, one of the gendarmes asked Mr. Dromard if all was well in his relationship. He answered yes, that he's happy, but then went on to explain to the gendarmes that he had a mistress, Muriel Bonin. The police then dig deeper in this direction, trying to find out a little more about his extramarital relationship.
Muriel Bonin is a 46-year-old executive secretary who has been married for 10 years. She worked in a building company the same one where Sylvain Dromard came to buy his equipment. That's how they met. Sylvain Dromard had many mistresses, but with Muriel, it was different.
Mr. Dromard put Muriel up in one of his apartments, in the same town as his main house where he lived with his wife, Laurence. But the two women put pressure on him, telling him he had to choose between them. He left Muriel 3 times to devote himself to his wife, but it never lasted for long, returning each time to his mistress. The last time was in April, 4 months before the murder. The police discovered that not only did Muriel and Laurence know each other, they also hated each other. Just 3 months before the tragedy, the mistress filed a complaint against Laurence, Sylvain Dromard's wife. On April 24th, 2010, Laurence had come to the mistress's house to explain herself. The explanation degenerated as Laurence asked Muriel to stop seeing her husband, explaining that she was his wife, before calling the mistress a whore. Muriel then lost her temper, slapped her across the face, and grabbed her by the hair. Mrs. Dromard responded with violent blows, which left Muriel with bruises, and she even had to stay home from work for 7 days. In Muriel Bonan's statement, it says that Mrs. Dromard had always wanted to destroy their relationship and said she would never leave them in peace. She made numerous threats, which she never carried out. Muriel says she doesn't understand why Laurence Dromard came to her home just so she could fight her. And for the gendarmes, it could be just the motivation one needed to murder a nuisance. Then, 3 weeks after the crime, Muriel Bonan was brought down to the station and questioned by the gendarmes. Muriel is a person who likes to talk a lot and is very seductive. Muriel seems to have prepared everything and expected to be asked about her schedule on July 15th, 2010. But the investigators are smart and will start with the events of July 14th, the previous day, during the national holiday. She didn't remember that day, but on the evening of July 15th, she knew her schedule down to the last detail. She went on to explain that she had absolutely nothing to do with this affair, but she was very afraid of being suspected by the police. She then stated, without having any concrete explanation for why, that she threw her phone into the Marne purely out of fear. The Marne River is 20 kilometers from Saint-Martin-d'Arbois.
The investigators will seize this opportunity even if it's a long shot. A team of divers arrived on the scene to search for this famous phone, which could well provide new evidence for this case.
Just a few hours after the search, the phone was found, without a SIM card, broken and burnt. At first glance, the phone was unusable, but thanks to the experts, they were able to salvage and explore the phone's internal memory, a goldmine for the investigators. Messages were manually deleted, but the investigators were able to trace some of the text messages that Muriel Bonan sent to Sylvain Dromard on July 1st, 15 days before the tragedy, and the messages were chilling to read.
I thought she was out of commission. You told me before the 17th, didn't you? If we support each other, yes. You'll need me, and I'll need you. Unless nothing happens, then that's another matter. Tell me tomorrow what you really want to do with her.
Thank you for watching this video.
We are excited to share these stories with you and to give a voice to the victims worldwide.
If you enjoyed this story,
You can help us out by liking the video, subscribing to our channel, and punching the notification bell.
very important, don't forget to give us your opinions in the comments.
Thanks again, and we'll see you next time. Au revoir!